Good morning to all of you. My name is Satya, and I'm delighted to be here to talk to you. We have a pretty full agenda, and I know we are running behind time. So what I'll do is keep my remarks brief so that you can get the benefit of the rest of the morning as well, because I know all of you have busy schedules and will want to make the most of your time. We live in strange times. Who would have expected Korea to actually do what it said it would do? And we are where we are. So where we've had a lot of discussion about war becoming obsolete and irrelevant, we are going to see some possibilities emerging as well. So some of these black swans are always there. And one of those black swans is actually what technology is doing to us. AI has been there for a very, very long time. A lot of development research has happened. But what has really happened now is the ducks are all in a row, and we are beginning to see a number of things coming together to change the way we look at AI, right? So, and that's not in small measure helped by the fact that we have a lot of capital being thrown at new ideas, very similar to what was happening during the dot-com era. So brace yourself for an amazing future in the next few years. I'm going to get the clicker now. Okay, what I'll do is talk about three things today, and there's no pun there. We talk about terrain and we put the sea, but that's the world we live in, right? It's a world of contradictions. I'll cover firstly what we see as the role of the CFO and the emerging role. What's actually happening in regard to the CFO's role. And all of you are at the center of it, so that's not going to be new, but time to reflect on what's changing. The second thing I'll do is talk about what we see as potential scenarios for the future role of the CFO. And I think it's not just the CFO, but the whole function, right? What's happening to the finance function as a whole, and the CFO at the pivot of that function. And finally, what competencies do we need to develop as CFOs and finance professionals to stay relevant and drive the scenarios in the direction that's going to help us serve our organizations better. But to set the backdrop, I want to talk briefly about what's happening at the C-suite with the CEOs, the people we work with and for. And KPMG does every year a global outlook where we talk to about, this year we spoke to about 1,300 CEOs around the world of the most significant and complex organizations. And obviously, the message coming through this year is that companies want to take charge. Last year, they were looking to respond to challenges. This year, companies want to take charge. They want to disrupt and grow. And so what some of the key findings there is really CEOs look at this as an opportunity rather than a threat. And I think the relevance for CFOs is you need to take the cue and follow the line and see disruption as an opportunity and not a threat. And the interesting thing is also many of the companies, 3 out of close to 75% of the companies, want to be seen as the disruptor. People who will change the face of their own industry and take charge of the change. Now, 2 other points I wanted to highlight. We will have the survey for the outlook for you on Slido, which I believe we'll put it on. But two points I want to highlight in addition to that. And that is that companies are far more open to collaboration. And Patrick mentioned it just a short while ago. Effectively, companies are far more open to work even with competitors in areas that we thought unthinkable. So you've seen the big alliances in the life sciences space. where companies are collaborating on innovation. You're seeing interesting supply chain innovation happening in areas where companies are prepared to put what was considered a very strategic asset for use by fellow players in order to extract the most from the value chain. So we're beginning to see more and more openness to alliances as a way of driving growth. But I just want to highlight, in ASEAN, this is slightly different. We have companies who are actually more keen to acquire rather than to ally. And I think there must be good reasons for that, because we're not yet there with the global companies around the mindsets of alliancing. So we want control and acquire companies. And finally, trust. And again, this was mentioned by Vinika in her starting address. The issue of trust is paramount. And again, here the role of the CFO is very important. You play a big role in driving how your organizations respond to the public trust deficit, and ensuring that you maintain and grow your reputation in the marketplace. So, to then go on to the first point, what are we seeing as the traditional role of the CFOs? And one of my mentors once told me that the introverted accountant looks at his own feet, the extroverted accountant looks at your feet. So, conservative, very conservative people who always see what can go wrong rather than what can go right, and rightfully so, as a devil's advocate in the C-suite. And technology ambivalent, in a sense, not having a point of view on technology, being an advocate or an evangelist for aspects of technology that can drive efficiency, effectiveness, and innovation in the function. Right? IT has been the driver of that agenda in the past and until recently. Change averse because, again, certainty around producing the core of what the finance function had to do as an organization. Primarily seeing our role as protecting the resources of the company, defend rather than attack, right? And then, keeping to our function, which is we don't get involved in a lot of the other things that's happening around the organization, and focused on compliance as a tactical function as opposed to a strategic function. So what's happening now, and I know a number of you are in the throes of this transition. You are trying to grapple with the varying demands that are being put on you as strategic leaders. Basically, organizations asking more of you from the data that you possess within the organization. So the finance function, for the better, is actually a strategic asset. You have access to all the organizational data, and you can make a difference by squeezing more and more out of it. There are problems, and we'll talk about that shortly. Technology empowered, becoming more progressive about taking a view on technology, using it for strategic advantage. Being seen as an innovator, and that's a huge leap. And that's why I know we're sitting in the right place. We're sitting in a business school, not in an accounting college, right? In many ways, that's the way forward, and the alliance which we put together with the three organizations here. And seeing finance as a source of competitive advantage, not as just a tactical custodial role. Supporting the CEO as a business partner in strategy, not looking at the finance function as essentially being a pure devil's advocate, right? And in that role, I know a number of you participate in your quarterly reviews and drive the conversation around what the business is doing to take things forward. And finally, seeing regulation as a strategic advantage. This is very powerful. If you see the disruptors in many of your sectors, I know some of you are in financial services, in transport and other places, disruption happens in highly regulated industries, where a disruptor identifies the regulation or the opportunity to play with the regulation as a source of competitive advantage. And I think we need to think harder about how finance here begins to help other C-suite executives who are in fact mired in dealing with the paradigm of current regulation to think beyond and look ahead. Yeah. So what did we do? We got together, as was said earlier, a number of CFOs from leading companies in Singapore and with regional roles, many of you, to really understand what was happening here and how CFOs need to navigate the digital terrain. What are the possible outcomes and what are the skills needed to make a difference to those outcomes. And what you have here, I think some of you may have picked it up, is this report, which we have. It's certainly the beginning of things, but it's a report which we hope will at least set the stage for the conversation around the role of the CFO and around how the CFO can make a difference to your organizations. So what are the possible scenarios? So I come to my second topic now. We've taken a view which is possibly alarmist in the first scenario, which is CFO cease to exist and basically become irrelevant. When I say cease to exist, let's be, it's a play on words, because to some extent an accountant will always be there. Whether the accountant becomes a CFO is another question. And the accountant may be a robot. Yeah. So, and as somebody said, with blockchain, who knows, you may not need accounting. Yeah? Double entry bookkeeping can become irrelevant. So the whole point is what are we talking about in that scenario? Essentially a diminished or very marginal role for the finance function, which becomes irrelevant to the strategic agenda of the company. And interestingly, among the CFOs, we had a small percentage who were concerned about that scenario. The second scenario is CFO as a service, and that's in line with the times where everything is a service. It is appealing, particularly as the role of the CFO becomes more and more sophisticated. The ability of smaller organizations to actually have a full-time CFO becomes more challenging and becomes a strategic disadvantage. So we see a possible scenario where that role evolves and becomes, in some ways, what Charles Handy would describe in his famous book, The Elephant and the Flea, as somebody who's an outsider helping the organization for hire, right? With the skills which they have, right? So the CFO as a service is not an unreasonable potential scenario, and it could emerge in certain segments. And in particular, we've been having these conversations on SMEs, particularly in Singapore, where they need to upgrade their finance skills. Their business model, their cost model doesn't allow them in the current context to actually get all of those skills. And so we see that as clearly a possible scenario. And we'll talk a bit more about some examples there. And finally, of course, the ones you're all expecting and would love to be in, is the scenario where the CFO effectively remains very relevant, not only remains relevant, but influential. Influential in the C-suite in a way that is far-reaching for the organization, and using a term we call augmented intelligence. So this, I think I must ask the team whether we have a copyright on this or it's somewhere outside. But effectively, artificial intelligence, which is on steroids with the CFO, right? So in all of these three scenarios, what's really important is to understand we debate all the time about disruption, about digitization, taking jobs away. It's not jobs, it's tasks. So as long as we agree that a job is a bundle of discrete tasks, some of which are interrelated, we have to break that down to a level where we say a large number of tasks will get automated, will get digitized, will go away. But the job or the roles of the job, which involve some very fundamental things around, firstly, taking responsibility. Who's going to take responsibility if a CFO is not there? You sit in front of your CEO when the numbers are not being met, and you have that difficult conversation on what's happening, right? So will a robot have that conversation? Not likely. So taking responsibility is hugely important. It's something which no machine is going to take. And you know, when that came to light when we had that self-driving car having an accident, who would you blame, right? So accountability and responsibility is a huge human thing, right? Interacting and mentoring people. As a CFO, you build people. You know, you have a team and you build people. That's not going to be done by a machine. And finally, engaging with stakeholders outside of your area of work and bringing people together. So I just want to recognize the importance of your roles in many layers and not just look at it as, will I get disrupted and what does that mean? Yeah. So here I think as we look at all of this data, it's alarmist, but let's keep at the back of our mind the fact that there are certain very, very human things which are not going to go away, and we as CFOs have a central role in keeping those responsibilities, and building on them. Yeah, yeah, and of course activities like this. So you know, on that basis, there's increasingly more robotics being applied in areas that we thought close to impossible. We are also seeing, and I just read this as I was preparing for this, that even in Wall Street, there were close to, I think, more than 2,000, 4,000 day traders, or a large number, 2,000 day traders. And there are now only floor traders, and there are now only 400 floor traders in Wall Street. And that's a huge drop when you look at something which is extremely personal, right, on the ground. Okay, so let's move on to the second scenario, which is really CFO as a service. And again here, we've seen this emerging over time from being a service to becoming part of an organization and potentially moving to a service. And again, there's lots of anecdotal evidence which is beginning to emerge around freelance CFOs and the barbecue test. Now, this is going back to my point about having interpersonal skills. In an organization, a CFO probably doesn't need to have, or at least a finance person doesn't need to have as many interpersonal skills as if you were a supplier of finance services, and that's why they have the barbecue test. Finally, I think in terms of the being relevant and stronger as a CFO in the scenario 3, I think we need to keep in mind the fact that there's a lot of happening on the robotic space, and it'll be good to know what you are doing in that regard. Digital labor is a very key topic, which I believe a number of our clients are talking about. We think not enough finance functions are working hard on it, particularly in Southeast Asia, and we'd like to hear more about that in the discussion and the Q&A. Now, again, as I said, there are areas like planning and functions like that where the role of augmentation as opposed to automation is significant. And I think in the planning and budgeting area, particularly as a finance professional, we can already see, while we've taken many things offshore in terms of transaction processing, the whole planning and budgeting area, there's a lot to be done. We have a colleague from Microsoft here to talk a bit more about what they're doing there, but interestingly, I think that is an area which is ripe for augmentation as a CFO, where you can play a significant role in turbocharging that to raise your role as a strategic asset for the company. So finally, this is my last topic, which is around, so what are the competencies that CFOs need to be relevant and increase your role in the C-suite? First, strategic leadership. So I'm sure INSEAD would want you to attend more of the executive programs to become more strategic. But really, don't be a digital victim, right? Take charge. Because both your organizations and your people, your functional support people, are looking for courage and inspiration from you. Don't look at disruption as, well, we're going to go down as a function. So strategic leadership, taking charge is important. Now, data-driven value creation, what can you do there? I started my career as a cost accountant many years back. And what I found is the biggest challenge in building a cost model was driver data. We struggled with the quality of driver data and combining financial information with operational information. Today you have so much data. So all the assumptions around value can be challenged. Around how you build a cost model can be challenged. You could have a cost model with 1,000 drivers which produces very high quality information. Because you have IoT now, you have data sensors, you have capture of information in so many places at an operational level. What are you doing with that data in combining it with the financial information that you have? Because this is what you can make great use of as a CFO and as a finance team in giving business very sharp insights about profitability in the business. The other thing I want to highlight to you, and this is important, is disruption is happening where profit pools are large, right? What happens is you as a CFO report to the CEO about the various business units in your company. You tell them that this business is making a lot of money, so let's look after them and so on. Let's not trouble them. And then the guy is losing money, is not very profitable, marginal, and then you beat the guy up, right? This is your standard process. But the reality is, the business which is most profitable is the one you should be pushing harder to think about what can go wrong, because that's exactly where disruption is happening in every single industry. Large profit pools are being taken away by disruptors. And this is the important thing that you as a CFO can play a huge role in not just challenging, but looking at what can come about. What are the drivers in that business? Who can come and change those drivers? What's the regulation there? How is regulation giving you the opportunity to make so much profit? And how can you take that regulation, turn it on its head, and say, well, somebody can come and do this, what are you doing about it, right? So I think the ability to think on these things and work harder at them is something the CFO can really add value to the CEO in thinking about. Digital labor. I know a number of you run shared services centers outside Singapore, but you have the leadership because you actually make the decisions. And interestingly, and Clarence would be happy to know, Singapore will not lose jobs if digital labor gets into those areas. And the point Patrick made about burning the candle at both ends, the reality is adversity is an opportunity. With the reducing labor force, the opportunity to use digital labor to do a number of things which are probably not in our realm today is a great opportunity. So seize, carpe diem, as someone would say, seize the day and use digital labor to think harder about what you can do to the tasks in the function. Yeah. Cross-functional collaboration. I think the CFO has so much power in terms of relationships that you have the opportunity to use that power to positive outcomes for the organization. And we think, therefore, your ability to collaborate with your peers across the functional domain and with the CEOs and business unit heads is hugely important. There are tools available, there's technology available now which helps you do that far more effectively. So look at those technologies, see how we can merge tools and technology and come together, and people and come together. Finally, cybersecurity. I just want to say that cybersecurity is something we believe is going to be a game changer. Partly because it is holding back many organizations in the I 4.0 journey, because they are worried about the risks that cyber threats will do if they put a lot of their value chain on the digital space. And we think there that the CFO has a great opportunity to become the leader in having the conversation around cyber, because you're also the custodian of a lot of the data in the organization. So think about all these skills and competencies and how you build that in your team, make the team relevant, and so migrate the skills of your workforce in the finance function and continue to be relevant. So I will not go through the details of this, but effectively what I've talked about is all here. But I just want to close by saying something. The finance function has often been a sweatshop where people are assumed to work harder and harder as the organization grows, and it's because you don't make money you're supposed to work harder. The marketing function can work less. So think about the future. Think about the future and ask this question: do we really have to work harder when technology can help us actually go home and have a better life, and yet we meet the needs of the organization? We are more strategic, we are more valuable to the organization and our leaders, and our people have a better life. So the whole digital terrain gives you that opportunity to ride into that beautiful space. Yeah? So pick it up and run with it. Thank you.